Hello, welcome or welcome back. My name is Ari. Captain, as usual, is snoring nice and loud down here. He snores louder when I talk because he knows I'm recording and he's a problem child and he wants to be dramatic. But you guys don't seem to mind the cute dog snoring, especially because I always put a picture up. Today's video is going to be a vlog of the 48-hour peace talks for Realmathon. If you're not aware, Realmathon is a readathon put on every year by Covers with Cassidy. She's linked down in the description box below. This is one of my favorite readathons because you don't have to pick a book for a specific prompt. A lot of those, while fun, sometimes I just hate the prompts. This one, you can read whatever the hell you want to, and then you get points where you're either adding points to your team or minusing points from somebody else's team based off of what was in the book. And there are so many different prompts that you could potentially apply to every single book you read. So you can target some of those prompts and read very specific things. Or if you just want to be like me and read whatever, I figure out what prompts a book fits after I finish reading it. Every team has a theme color, a theme item, and if your book has any of those things, then you get 10 extra plus or minus points. And then for all teams, if the book has a school setting, you get 10 extra plus or minus points. Another way you can get points is based off of how many pages a book has. And for this weekend in particular, every book you read gets you 10 extra points for your team. So the goal is to read as many books as I can in the next 48 hours. I have a potential TBR for this that I am going to go over with you guys. I am going to choose this TBR via spinner wheel. I have just taken the 7 books that I have on this TBR, put them in a spinner wheel. I'm going to spin it, read whatever book pops up, and then move on to the next book, spin it again. You guys get how this process works. I will not read if I have to choose something for myself. I don't know why. So this is why I have so many videos that are like, such and such chooses my read. I don't mind putting a book in a list of things that I want to read, but when it comes down to just read whatever you want, I will scroll on TikTok instead of reading. So this is my pile of books plus 2 more that are ebooks, not physically here. Let's go through them. For some reason, I was struggling through that clip and I forgot to mention the prompts that I'm looking for here. So for Team Shadow, which I am on Team Shadow, I am looking for books with a black cover or a mostly black cover, 51% of the cover being black. Cover consists of the front of the book and the back of the book, not the spine. And the team item that I'm looking for is a building on the cover. Again, front cover, back cover, but not the spine. In a school setting, but none of these are school settings, so that doesn't matter. First up, I have Vengeful. I don't know if you can see this, but there is crap all over this cover. I don't know what that is. It came like that. I will get a wet wipe and wipe it off eventually, just not right at this moment. This one is a mostly black cover. Next up I have When We Were Orphans by Kazu Ishiguro. One of my favorite authors, a fairly short book, and I know it has a lot of black on it, but I feel like this is mostly a white cover with black on it. So I'm not going to count it for the cover color, but it does have a building in the background here. So I think you can see that. Definitely a building. So it has the item prompt. Still, I'm not going to count it for the color. Then I have Fever Dream by Samantha Schweblin. This is a mostly black cover, and that's it. It just has the color of it. This one's very short, and the formatting in here, the margins, such wide margins. So I think this one will read very, very quickly. Next up I have Leech, which I think we'll read pretty quickly. This is horror, and it does have a building on the cover. But I would say this is a mostly blue cover, not black, so just the building on that. And then Murder Road by Simone St. James. I'm very, very excited to read this. If I had to pick a book for myself, this is what I would read next. But I figured I'd save it for this weekend because it has pretty much all black on the cover, would count for that. I got a very, very late arc of Those Beyond the Wall by Micah Johnson. This has a lot of black on it, but again, I don't think that this is a mostly black cover, but it does have buildings. You can see the buildings everywhere. So I'm gonna count for buildings, but I don't think gray is a shade of black. But I still don't think it counts. Like this doesn't feel like a mostly black cover to me. So I am just gonna count this for the buildings in the background, but it does count for that. And like I said, this one I really only put on here because I think I got the arc for this the day before it published. So I didn't read it with the rest of my arcs for March because I didn't have it when I was making my March TBR. This is a sequel to The Space Between Worlds, which was a fantastic sci-fi that I read a couple years ago. And then the final book. This is Dream by the Shadows by Logan Carley, and it is a mostly black cover with a building on the cover. This one's kind of on the long side, but I think it's fantasy romance. Like I bought it, or I got this in like one of those Stuff Your Kindle Day sales, and the only ones I ever seem to actually partake in are fantasy romance ones. So I think it's fantasy romance, but let's figure out what book is first. All right, spin number 1. Gets us Those Beyond the Wall, which is the arc that I have, so this is what I'm going to be reading first. Great! Another book off my NetGalley list. Apologies for the sounds of the clothes washer. It's literally on the wall attached to this room, but I just finished this book and I need to pick another one, so we gotta talk about this one. I just finished Those Beyond the Wall by Micah Johnson. It is technically the sequel to The Space Between Worlds, but you can read it as a standalone. Like I wouldn't recommend it. There's like Easter eggs and stuff that you get from this book that you see in the second book, but they follow different characters and they're like their own standalone stories. You technically don't need either story to complete the other, but it's always good to have more information, right? Plus, this book is great. Those Beyond the Walls is potentially one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. It was fantastic, and I highly recommend it. This is a sci-fi series, and the major sci-fi element of this universe is interdimensional travel. The world has gone to shit, and there are some walled cities that protect people from like the immense desert-like environment, but there are also poor people who live outside of the walls of these walled cities. And as far as interdimensional travel goes, you can travel to another dimension that's basically like the same timeline as the world you're living in, but slightly different. Like maybe you come to a fork in a road, you make one decision, you don't make the other, but in another universe somebody makes that decision, and so 2 separate dimensions are created. You can only travel to another dimension if you don't exist in that dimension. If you try to travel to a dimension that you do exist in, then you die. Really, really horrible death. In The Space Between Worlds, we follow Kara, who is dead in all of but like 7 worlds that she could travel to. Her life has been really shitty and she's suffered a lot of abuses in addition to growing up just generally poor, so she doesn't tend to survive. And because she has had such a horrible life and a horrible childhood, she is very useful as an adult to the wealthy people in power because she can go explore all of these other worlds. Because those in power, those who grow up in wealth and privilege, don't tend to die at a young age. they tend to have a much higher rate of survival. You see that like disparity and privilege a lot in the first book, but the second book, it is the same universe, the same world after the events of the first book, but following a completely different character. In this one, we follow Mr. Scales. And before you think we're following a guy in this, we are not. Scales is a woman, and Mr. is just a title, pretty much. So both male and female people can be Mr. in this universe. She is an enforcer in Ashtown. Ashtown is the settlement outside of the walled city, where all of these like poor, underprivileged, non-citizen people live. These are the children of migrant workers, and just generally too poor to afford life in the city. Thus they are outcast and not accepted. In Ashtown and in the walled city, these bodies are showing up of just like people who are being almost ripped apart from the inside, and there's no hint of a murderer. Like, people are seeing these things happen and there's not a person doing it, it's just like their own bodies are doing it. So Scales is put in charge of trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening, and we go through the story from there. We see appearances from like Kara from the first book and the second book, but again, you don't necessarily have to read the first book. I still recommend you do. Although this is an interdimensional sci-fi type of story, it's really a story of apartheid. The people outside of the walls in the desert city are people of color. They are Black people. And there's a lot of similarities in this story to racism and events that are happening in today's America. At the beginning of the book, in an author's note, Micah Johnson said that she wrote this shortly after a 62-day sit-in at Tennessee's state capitol, and that this is a story of anger. It's a story of rage. Black people have had just compounded injustices for hundreds of years in the United States, and it seems like it's getting worse instead of getting better, and that is what this story is about. But not only that, it's beautifully written, it's so well told, it's moving, it's morally gray at times. Like, the anger comes through, the hatred for the situation you're in, but also not wanting to like assimilate into this white society that you want no part of. How do you fix these differences when the people in the walled city don't want you? They just want you to no longer exist. Highly, highly recommend. 5 stars, obviously. I'm really glad I read this. I was gonna read it eventually, but I probably wouldn't have read it this soon if I didn't have an arc of it. So, highly recommend. Let's spin the wheel and get to the next book. Alright, next up is Vengeful by V. Schwab. I'm an idiot. Vengeful is the second book in the series. I thought it was the first. Vicious is the first, and this doesn't fit any prompts, so I'm not going to read it right now. I'm gonna kind of DNF it. I read like half of a chapter before I was like, I have no idea what's going on and it sounds like I should, and then realized that it's the second book in the series. Yeah, so let's spin again. And it is Fever Dream. This really shouldn't take very long to read at all. Let's find out. I finished Fever Dream, which was weird, but not really my kind of weird. This woman is, I want to say, in a coma in a hospital, maybe laying dying. She's in a hospital. She's very sick. And this little boy is having her like tell him her story and like what happened. And so she's like having a conversation with this kid and like going through everything that happens, and he's trying to like get the whole story out of her, being like, that's not important. We need to move on to what's important. And she'll be like, no, I want to like focus on this. And he'll be like, no, we need the details. And it's just weird like that. But mostly what this is like a mother-child relationship. This boy is not her child, but he is a child to another woman who cares very much about her, and she is the mother to a little girl. And a lot of this is about those like relationships, but there's also this like underlying thing of what I want to call like Erin Brockovich, where there's something in the water that's poisoning people, specifically children, and that's kind of like why she's so sick. But the story has like no point to it. There's not really a beginning. We don't know anything about the characters. We don't know any history of the characters. There's no end to the story. There's no resolution to the story. You don't have any idea what's going on. But if you just want to read something weird, this is something weird. It took me like an hour to read. That brings us to our next book, and I've got 4 books left. At no point have I ever cared which book that I'm getting. So let's see what it is. Oh yay, it's the Simone St. James. I don't like thrillers very much unless Simone St. James writes them. I will read anything this woman puts out. So I'm very excited to get to read this right now. Murder Road by Simone St. James. So this takes place in 1995, and it follows a newly married couple who are headed to their honeymoon. They get lost along the way, and it's 1995, you don't just have Google Maps. It's late, they're on this weird back road that is like pitch black, like twisty, you think you're the only person left in the world kind of back road. And as they're driving along this, they see this woman kind of like shuffling along the side of the road, like hunched over, and the wife is like, let's stop and see what this is. Like, we've been driving on this road forever, I haven't seen a sign of another person, I don't know where the nearest city is, like, I'm a little bit worried about this woman walking by herself this late at night. And they pull over and talk to this woman, offer her a ride, realize that she's been stabbed, and so they stick her in the backseat of the car and drive to the hospital. And the woman is conscious, and she tells them there's a hospital like a couple miles up the road ahead, just keep going this way, blah blah blah. So even though they're lost, they can get to the hospital. So they get to the hospital, this woman that they found dies at the hospital. Police show up and think that they killed her. Now, this is like the sticking point for me in this whole story, is why on earth would anybody think that these 2 people killed her? Why would, if you're going to kill somebody on the side of a road, why would you take them to the hospital? It's explained away at the very end of the book. I think the explanation is stupid, as I think accusing these people of killing this woman are, but the entire point of accusing them of killing her was to get them to stay in town. A lot of hikers have been killed along this road in like the past 20 years. The first death happened in 1976, and the woman who was killed in 1976 was never identified, and they believe that she is haunting that stretch of road, and that if you ever see her, you're gonna be the next person to die along this road, right? So that's where the ghost comes in. This is Simone St. James, so the ghost part is very prominent and very much an actual ghost. Like, there's no questioning, like, is this haunted or are they just seeing things? No, this is a ghost. So I really disliked probably the first 100 pages of this book, because these 2 are being investigated for this murder, and it just felt so dumb to me. It took me like 45 minutes to read the first 100 pages, so it didn't last that long. And once they got into the investigation, like, well, if they're going to accuse us of this murder, then we're going to figure out who the real murderer is. That part, much more entertaining, much more like the Simone St. James I like. Definitely not in my top favorites of her novels, but it was a quick popcorn read and good enough, I guess. Alright, there are 3 books left. I probably have time for one more book. So let's see what that one book is going to be. I forgot to record this, I'm sorry. Alright, this is Dream by the Shadows. This is the ebook that I have. I'll put the cover up here. This is going to give us lots of points. Lots and lots and lots of points, so I guess this is a good one to read. I believe this is like 400 pages, so it will probably take me the rest of the time to read it, but let me jump right into that. Final book done. This is Dream by the Shadows by Logan Carley. Logan is a woman with a traditionally masculine name, if you were confused like I was. This is like a self-published fantasy romance. It was the author's debut novel. I guess it's her only novel. She hasn't released the second book in this duology yet. And this has an interesting premise, but the execution doesn't quite live up to the premise. Now, in this world, for the past 500 years, give or take, if you dream, there's a chance you're going to have a nightmare, and in the nightmare, a demon will take over your body in real life, and there's no way to like save you from that. You are just cleansed by the church, specifically this guy called Lightbringer. They have developed an elixir that people can take that keeps them from dreaming, but the elixir costs money, so the poor, impoverished people of this land are disproportionately affected by these demons overtaking their body. Our main female character's name is Esther, and her parents are like elixir dealers, and they are arrested for doing something supposedly illegal, and her older sister has also previously died because she didn't take her elixir one night, had a dream, became a demon, etc., etc. The male love character is the dream demon guy. There's a guy known as Shadowbringer who is sending all of these demons to the land to kill people, but he also collects the souls of the people who have been overtaken by demons and maybe eats them. I don't remember that part. It's not that important. Esmer ends up like embroiled with this Shadowbringer dude, and they end up going on some adventures through dreams. Overall, the story isn't good, but it's kind of a good time. At no point during any of this did I feel like DNFing it. Did I think, oh, I hate this, I don't want to read the rest of this novel, I want to DNF it. Like, the story was fine. The characterizations were not very good. The characters' personalities would change just willy-nilly just to continue the plot line forward, but because the personalities were so just all over the place, you couldn't really relate to any of the characters, and it didn't really make sense like why they liked each other at any given time, because sometimes they would hate each other and then like 2 lines later they'd be like, oh my god, I'm in love with you, and then you're like, what happened? Like, nothing happened in between those 2 sentences that would make that change make sense. There are also a lot of plot holes in the story. Again, that could really bother you if having plot holes bothers you, but if it doesn't ever bother you and you're fine with the plot holes, then the story's still fine without it. Like, the story makes sense even with the plot holes, but every once in a while you're like, but why though? In the end, I gave it a 3, so not great, not bad. If you think the premise sounds interesting, then I definitely say pick it up. It's on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription, you can get it for free. Well, kind of. But if it doesn't sound interesting to you, I have no real reason to push it on you. This is a duology. The second book's not out yet. I think if the second book was already out, then I probably would have continued on with the series, but I don't know when the second book's coming out. So I'm not even going to put this on my like series tracker sheet because I don't think I care enough to, at some unknown point in the future, come back to this. As far as smut goes, there is no smut. It's kissing at most. There may be smut in the second book. Again, it's not out. I don't know, but it wasn't really a slow burn romance. They just don't do anything but kiss. There was no romance. Like, they're attracted to each other, but you can't, there was no, like, burning. There was no lead up. It was just all of a sudden they decided that they're together. It's kind of a I can fix him kind of plot line is the best way I could describe how they ended up together. Again, it's not bad. It's just also not good. Thank you for watching my adventure through the Peace Talks weekend. Hopefully Team Shadow wins the whole thing. Go Team Shadow. And I will see you next week for my TBR for April. Bye!